Hi, everybody. So, hope you're all well. Hit like there. I saw someone in the chat say hit like. Thanks for joining me, obviously. And yeah, do get the like going and the share going if you can. Going to go through quite a few bits today. Well, not quite a few bits, about 2 or 3 things. I want to talk a little bit more about the subject I did yesterday, which is the 1,500 seasonal workers, because I think there's more to it than I actually kind of was talking about yesterday. I feel like I have more to say on that. I want to look at some of Blindboy's woes. I don't know if you saw Blindboy, the guy with the plastic bag on his head. A little bit of a story about him, and then go to the Burkean's latest honeypot against these kind of NGO and Antifa type of people. So that's kind of the bit I'm looking forward to. I always enjoy that. So give me an old hello in the chat there if you can hear me okay and everything's going well. I would appreciate it. And like I say, give this a share. Oh, I didn't actually share it myself, so bear with me. Here on Garrod Vision, we do quite a casual operation here. So I am just tweeting currently this stream just to get it out there. So Dunzo. Kind of forgot that bit. Okay, thanks for letting me on and me know I'm okay. I'm actually just going to share this a little bit more even. So I am. Okay. I have a bit more housekeeping to do than I actually thought I did. So I think you will bear with me for just a sec while I just do something else quickly. It's just to do with, I gotta sign out of these Twitters, because when you're live streaming, you don't want to share someone's DM or any of that stuff. Not that there's anything too sensitive there. It's just you know, it's good practice, isn't it? I should really be doing all this before I go live if I was anyway decent, but what can you do? Okay. Now, there we go. Okay, I think I am up to speed there. So let me see how everyone is doing in the chat. Paul O'Neill says, get the Barry's tea brewing. Absolutely. I have my trusty, now my battery's running low, but I have my trusty bottle of tea, which I've ranted about before. A flask of tea is a good idea. It saves the cup of tea from going cold and having to go back and keep kind of making another one. So that's just a little piece of my wisdom for you there. So I want to kind of talk about the farming thing more here, that they're bringing in 1,500 seasonal workers. I was talking to a friend of mine just before I went live, and it just kind of got me thinking about it more, you know, this whole situation. And about a line I heard, and you can say I'm beating the same old drum here, but you know, I believe this stuff, about someone who told me, I don't want to name them here, but someone who told me a couple of years ago, I was having a pint with him. He'd be a kind of a like-minded person to myself. And he said, you know, mass immigration is a war against the working class. It's a very interesting figure of speech, that. And this reminds me of it. It just tells me a lot about, and you know what it does really is this. We're talking about crop pickers here, but you could also be talking about Deliveroo drivers or whatever. It's about the working class, the relationship between the working and the kind of upper middle classes. These are kind of loose terms, but the relationship between those two sets of people is and always has been a kind of competitive one in my point of view, because the working class, so to speak, these terms are outdated, but are a kind of a service class for the middle and upper classes, whether it's a plumber or a crop picker, and these aren't all in the same league or whatever of employment, but or a Deliveroo driver. All of these various things are seen as services for the middle and upper classes. And you, of course, will have people who own big businesses talking about labor as their big cost. They always talk about labor, labor, this, that. That is their biggest cost and it's their biggest problem. And they obsess over that. So don't be fooled into thinking that there being an agenda among the kind of richer people in our society in terms of employment, or in terms of labor costs, and then of course labor via immigration, that there isn't a kind of it doesn't have to be them in a room smoking cigars necessarily, although they might. It doesn't have to be that. It could just be a kind of a slightly incoherent force and kind of a confluence point of people having a certain interest, people of a certain point or a certain class, having a certain set of interests and kind of lobbying for those interests loosely. And a big factor of, or a big part of that is this labor, cheap, basically slave class labor. And of course, this whole thing of Irish people won't do these jobs. They won't do them for less than a living wage. So they get these guys in. But what really struck me about this, and it's the reason I'm picking up on this from yesterday, is and there's so much you could say about this. This deserves a podcast. It'd be good if I actually had a couple of guests on tonight, because it deserves so much thought, and I will always remember this story as being an important one, is because this stuff is happening all the time. This whole kind of, and when I was talking to my friend about this before I went live, we were kind of teasing out all of the different reasons why, if you came up with a solution to fix this problem to do with this crop stuff, it would just lead to another problem. For example, pay the workers more. Well, if you pay the workers more, then those goods won't be able to compete against goods that are made abroad. So the same broccoli that gets picked in wherever, Spain or here or there or whatever, might be able to compete cheaper because they have cheap labor. They can access cheap labor when we can't. Therefore, it won't sell in Tesco's. It won't be bought by Tesco's or whatever. Therefore, you would need to protectionize or whatever the economy. But then that creates another one. And so it tells you, and you should try this yourself. Just do a little brainstorming on how you'd solve this. And each answer raises another question, kind of brought on by this kind of globalized economic order that we're all living in. And Ireland is especially subject to this. It's our big thing. So each answer raises far more problems and questions, and they all lead back to the same place of globalism. Which is why I think this story is important, because it's not just about a bunch of crops happening that need to be picked late summer, early August in Ireland in 2020, which is, a microcosm. That's a smaller thing on its own. It connects to everything and it says everything. The fact that it's happening in a pandemic is the other aspect to this, is that a point I just wanted to make, and I won't spend long on this, is that, and also Conor McGregor was commenting on this, which is what I'm going to get onto in a second, but a key aspect of why this story is more than just a little story is because this whole problem, I've outlined it yesterday and today a little bit, of this globalization, what's inherently wrong at the heart of globalization, has been occurring all the time. It didn't just happen now that this guy needs these workers. The problems at the heart of it to do with pricing and competition and different labor forces at different levels around the world, and creating this inherent problem, which goes back to a couple of nights ago, I did the American Factory documentary, a talk about that. All of these problems that stare us in the face are happening all the time. They're ongoing constantly. They're a constant thing. A story like this is only the curtain pulling itself back a little bit, and you get a little glimpse of this kind of, ashamed, naked person behind it who doesn't want to be looked at. This type of, you get a little glimpse, and you go, whoa, it's really bad. But it's happening all the time. It's just when things run smoothly, it doesn't really get talked about. And if I were to say something like, the leadership of our country, of industry, of business, of government, and multinationals and all of this, they want cheap labor from abroad to weaponize it against Irish people effectively as an alternative not to pay them more. The classic relationship between labor supply and demand. When labor is constricted, there are two options: a bit of mechanization and paying more money. There's no other way around that. The only way you really incentivize people to join your workforce is to pay them more. You could do other things, but that money is what it comes down to. And if I were to say in an ordinary time, they want cheap labor, and that's what immigration is really all about. When they tell you, oh, love and diversity and equality, and oh, don't be racist and all that, that is just a veneer and a kind of a ideology that's just transplanted on top of the basic thing, which is just the need for cheap, disposable, pliant labor in order to keep wages down to what's the word I would use? People say lower wages. It doesn't lower wages. I've forgotten that word. It stagnates wages, right? As costs go up, but that is going on all the time. And I could give you my theory on that, and others could give you your theory on that, and we could be dismissed as, oh well, you're drawing inferences there that are a bit. You're drawing those inferences too strongly. Maybe it's not this big thing, Garrod. Someone could say that to me. And although in normal times I think I would be able to assemble quite a body of evidence to say, well, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's quite obvious, right? In normal times, that would be one thing. But at a time like this, and every now and again, specifically with this story, it bursts out in front of us, and it's kind of rolling around on the ground, and everybody's like, whoa, look at that. It's in the room. It's just becomes completely obvious and completely awkward almost. And a situation like this is what I'm talking about. Ordinarily, the government just lobby or kind of push this kind of economic system of open borders on us. And when I say it's pushed on us, it is. Anyone who's my age or a bit older maybe remembers 2004, around 2003, 4. And I'm not that old, right? I'm in my late 20s, and I can remember the change happening. So I'm pretty young, relatively speaking. And I remember all of a sudden, and this isn't a diatribe against Polish people or any of that, right? But just all of a sudden, there were Polish people everywhere, right? And everybody was kind of bemused by it and going, what's going on here? Nobody was raging out or hating them too much or whatever, but maybe a bit of like annoyance that they don't speak English and stuff. But I remember it happening. I remember it was a topic of conversation everywhere, that this was just happening. And that's why I say the government imposed this situation on us. It's not some kind of just thing that happens or whatever. It is an active system, because a thing like that, where you went from like the year 2000 to 2004, 5, 6, and suddenly there's just all these foreigners absolutely everywhere, working everywhere, feeding this kind of beast of an economy, being the service class for it. And that was, all I can give you is just my word on this. And I'm sure most of you remember it yourselves anyway, nothing felt natural about that, right? That was completely a decided on thing. And then it was invoked through them joining the Eurozone. And then, and it wasn't just a consequence of that. It was obviously an agreed on, nicely planned out in advance European/Irish government thing that was going to happen. And they knew it was going to happen and lied about it. So anyway, I'm diverging, but my point is that wasn't and isn't to this day just something that happens. It's a thing. It's government. My point is that it's government policy. It's not just something that happens, a vacuum of some description. It's an active government policy to keep the borders open, to ease immigration or the immigration requirements or whatever, the immigration tests and all of this different stuff and limits or whatever, to ease them to the point where this guy can have 1,500 seasonal workers of a given year and they can just come. And that's what the system engages in. That's what it kind of wants. It doesn't just end up like turning a blind eye and what happens. It maps this stuff out and goes, we need this much labor. We want, or it's not even we need, but we want this much. And they bring it in. And like I say, just to come back to my point, this is happening all the time. And it's as much of a disgrace last year that these 1,500, assuming it happened last year, because they say it has been regular. Sorry, these 1,500 and last year were brought in to do this. It was just as much of a scandal then, and as much of a strange thing to have to do that. The only difference is those people who came bought their own plane tickets and arrived and whatever. What is incredible about this is that in a situation of a pandemic where you basically, right, can't leave your house, you get stopped if you go more than 2 kilometers away or even closer than that. You get asked where you're going, where'd you come from, where'd you go, and all of that. All non-essential work is stopped. Blah, 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 right? The whole thing. Unprecedented situation. And lots of people are off of work. Lots of people are sacked from work. They're laid off, furloughed or whatever. They're off work. So there's no shortage of labor in the country, really. Like potential labor, if you want to call it that. Yeah, potential labor is a good word for that. There's no shortage of that, and we have a pandemic. Our country is shut off from 1-2 meters to the next, and the idea that the government, or I don't know who's it's an agreement that's just kind of being done to allow charter flights for 1,500 Romanians and Bulgarians to come here to pick crops. The story as a little microcosm just bursts out and shows you how insane the globalized economy actually really is. Because under normal circumstances, a person who was a free trade guy and all this could argue to me that they just believe in that system and they think it's most efficient. And I would disagree normally, but at least we could disagree, and I could grant it to some extent. But the fact that it has to perpetuate itself into a pandemic situation shows how deeply embedded it is and how far the rot has gone, that they can't actually unwind from it and just kind of use a national economic kind of solution to something, albeit it could be, you could say it's improvised or whatever. The fact that they can't even under these circumstances improvise, and a circumstance of being shut down and having lots of people unemployed, we can't under those circumstances improvise a national economic solution to what is not that complicated a problem. We can't do that. We have to reach right back into the global solution, which is like something as preposterous as bringing in 1,500 seasonal workers, instead of just because ultimately we can't do anything else. We can't, because the devil's advocate there would say, well, if you want to get Irish workers, you'll have to pay them a commensurate wage to the work and to the labor and all of that, and to living standards. The farmers or the big farms or whatever would have to pay them that much. Therefore, like I said earlier, they couldn't compete with imported broccoli from another country. So it's basically you either bring in your peasant class to pick your crops, or you import the crops from somewhere where the peasant class are in their own country, so to speak. And that's not me being derogatory. That's me expressing how contemptuous the I don't want to sound too ideological, but the capitalist class in Ireland are, that they need to do that. So that's your option, and it all depends on this. And it's been like this throughout history, slavery and all of this. People always want, the powerful will always want a cheap labor force, a pliant labor force, and this is just the modern way of doing it, and it involves flying people across the world. They're so unwilling to pay people a respectable wage, and ultimately to create an economy that can facilitate that, and a system, that they're jumping through hoops in the middle of a pandemic, chartering flights full of Bulgarians. Insane. And like I say, to unwind it would mean, so again, the ultimate conclusion here is that, like, to pay people a commensurate wage for them to pick the broccoli would mean you would have to introduce protectionism. So you would have to say, okay, we're introducing protectionism for Irish broccoli. Let's say start on one crop. Because we have a problem during a pandemic, we are just going to, we're just going to reorient the system, not just by stopping the Bulgarians coming in, but by the downstream consequences of this. We have to address those as well, right? So, for example, protectionism for broccoli, which means if people want to buy it in Tesco's, or Tesco's want to buy it up, and then customers want to buy it from Tesco, well, you're going to have to get it from this Irish broccoli. Therefore, if you really want it, someone's going to have to pick it. And if someone has to pick it, you have to pay people a certain amount to get them in here, obviously. And so as a consequence, the broccoli is going to be more expensive. Now, I know myself, and I'm sure a lot of you are guilty of it too, right? Broccoli lives matter, someone says there. A lot of you are probably guilty of this too. It's so cheap. You go into a Tesco's or a Lidl or something, right? You pick up a head of broccoli and it costs about 40 odd cent. Or I don't know, I don't even know what it costs, right? But it's cheap. A lot of these vegetables and stuff. and you kind of just, without being an economist or anything, you just kind of have a sense of it. You just go, that feels like it's a bit too cheap. You just do. And very often people will bring fruit and veg back from the shop, and it'll kind of go off on the shelf and you end up chucking some of it in the bin. A reason you do that and don't take it more seriously is because it's so cheap anyway, right? It's basically, peanuts. And so, like, again, you would end up in a situation where a head of broccoli would just cost that bit more, even if it cost twice as much or whatever. If you specifically wanted it, right? If you specifically want that, you'll get it. And you'll treat it. I'm really going off on broccoli. You will treat the broccoli with respect, right? But that would be it at a normal price. And then if you say, well, how are we supposed to live with all this stuff being expensive? Think about it. If you look at these pie charts for economic expenditure, like household expenditure and stuff, there used to be a big portion of the pie chart would go on food, like grocery shopping, food shopping. A large proportion, if you just looked at a pie chart, you would see, quite a bit is going on that. These days, it's actually much smaller, and what is much more is housing, which would be rent mortgages and stuff. And another thing that's bigger is insurance. So again, everything is a policy decision. It's not that we couldn't handle a world where food costs a bit more because you have to pay people more because you have a limited labor force, which would be Irish. And so you actually have to pay what the thing kind of costs. If you were to have to do that, then it just wouldn't be feasible. Everybody starves. No, because through a different set of policies that we've, in the real world, what we've instituted over the last couple of decades is where, yes, groceries have come down, the Tesco's, the Lidl's, the farmers getting fucked out of it with their beef and everything else, right? And having to bring in Bulgarians or Romanians to pick crops like a slave class, right? It's like, okay, yes, granted, that has made those things cheap, but it hasn't made people's lives any more kind of bountiful, really. People are still renting, being like molested by rape costs and mortgage costs, which ultimately is banks and landlords. And then another thing like insurance has gone up, right? So for some reason, the value, if people are to say, well, the value of picking the broccoli just isn't that great, it's not that skilled or whatever, right? How skilled do you need to be a landlord? Because if you look at the profits, if you judge it by how much you're paid, if you judge value of labor by just how much people are paid in the status quo, then you would have to look at a landlord and say, well, a landlord gets paid, so to speak, an absolute bucket load every month. So that must be a really high skill job, right? Which it obviously isn't. So it doesn't work like that. And okay, maybe insurance is a bit more complicated. It can be. But ultimately, it's not that banking isn't that complicated a business compared to some kind of technological stuff. And banking is just another usurious, and to an extent, insurances too. And these things are making a killing, and they're taking massive slices out of people's pie charts. So I know I'm going a bit off into the weeds, but to me, it does make sense. It's that the idea that you pay what a thing actually costs, and workers get paid what they deserve, enough for them to actually do it, for it to be worth their while to do it. Workers of all stripes. When I mean work, I mean just hard work, right? Whatever these kind of low skill, low pay, low status jobs. Pay them what they deserve. Pay them what, and I don't mean what they deserve in some kind of progressive-y kind of moral sense. I just mean in terms of straight up economic sense. They are worth more. The only reason people can get away with saying, oh, well, it's just not that high value, is because of this artificial interference by flying in during a pandemic 1,500 workers from Bulgaria. So there's nothing natural about the low pay or the low status or whatever of these people who pick crops and do these lower end jobs and stuff like that. They could be valuable, and they actually are to a certain extent, but it's artificially weighed up against via this interference. Meanwhile, things like banking, things like landlord, rent, housing costs, and insurance, and all of these industries suddenly become more and more of a thing. So I just don't buy any of these arguments that, hey, you just have to, it's just the way it is. It's like, it's just that they're very low value and there's no way around it. And there's no way, if we want to have broccoli, that we can do it any other way. And it's like, absolutely, this is all 100% a policy. And it's a devious and disgusting policy, to my mind. It's a hateful policy, I would say. So that's just my point. This is all one big policy, and it doesn't start and end with broccoli. That's only the microcosm. It speaks to the entire problem. The problem being that we have a bad policy. And what's worse about it is that the policy isn't spoken about. Nobody in polite society, anybody who does talk about it openly. You look at the, give me a like here as well and share, by the way, guys. But you look at the people on the so-called left, right? The Paul Murphys and all these guys. I don't pay too much attention to them, but they do talk about, oh, that's wrong, and we should pay everybody more, and we should blah, 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 blah. They'll say all of that, but I never hear them unpacking the actual structural basis of labor, capital, supply, demand, competition, this, that, and the other, to address it. Like, what actually is going on here? Because that would be a genuine and sincere effort to change things. They never do. They never get to the heart of these problems. And the only people who do explore this in any kind of way end up getting called far right. And that's not an accident either, I maintain. But what was I going to say? So, so it you know, like I say, this microcosm isn't just its own thing. It speaks to everything. It speaks to what is not just an accident, but an active policy. And what's worse is that the policy isn't even seen as a policy. What's more devious than it being such a horrible, hateful, treasonous kind of policy? What's worse than that actually being the case is that it's not actually allowed to really be called a policy. You're not allowed to really call it a policy insofar as you say it could be a bad policy. You can only, it's just like with the replacement kind of thing. It's either true and a great thing, or if you think it's not a good thing, it's untrue. It's that dichotomy. You're back to that weird headfuck of a thing, right? Where it's like, you either think this globalized kind of economy type of situation is, if you think it's good, it exists, it's real. If you think it's bad, it's imaginary, right? You're left at a situation like that. Or if you think it's bad, you're evil. If you think it's good, then it exists for sure. It's a policy. It's a great policy. Fine, but if you think it's bad, then it's not a policy. It's just the way the world is, and you're evil, or something like that, right? So that's the deviousness of it, that it doesn't even get treated as this whole 1,500 seasonal workers doesn't really get treated in polite society, and the kind of tastemakers and the kind of media classes and all of that, education institutions, all of that. It doesn't get treated by these people as a policy. They don't really look at this and say, this is one of many ways you could approach a thing. There's many ways to skin a cat. This is one way, and it's clearly an absurd way. It's an insane way. So what other ways could we do this where we wouldn't need to bring these people in like this in the midst of a pandemic? The question doesn't really come up. And insofar as it does come up, you're not talking about the labor thing and the rights of Irish people to their kind of own country, to be a kind of protected labor force in a certain way, protectionism of the labor force itself. So I could potentially figure out ways you could criticize this. I suppose some people could, but they couldn't get to the heart of it. And if you can't get to the heart of it, then you're really not talking about it in the first place. And if you do get to the heart of it, you're outside the realm of respectability and stuff. So to me, without getting too conspiratorial, loosely speaking, it is all kind of designed in such a way, and you end up with this situation. In comes the notorious Conor McGregor, right? Our populist, our god emperor, right? Or whatever. I'm being sarcastic, but he is picking up on things, and some people have said it's cynical and all of this. There's no way to read a man's mind. I have my reasons for thinking there's an element of sincerity to this. Again, I'm not going to simp for the guy, but there's an element of sincerity. I don't think he just came to this general point of view yesterday for expediency, for his own sake. I personally feel like he's kind of had that general essence about him kind of all along. And really all he's saying here is common sense anyway. It's not exactly some big deal, and you can see the tweet here he put up earlier. I can't quite get my head around it. I get the point he's making. He's making the same point I pretty much am. that much is kind of generally clear. But in terms of the breaking it down, I'm reading it kind of going, what exactly are you saying there? He says, men and women, we are hiring. I need 1,500 laborers ready to work in our amazing food and agriculture industry. Please send all CVs to Leo Varadkar and Michael Creed. So I think it's a bit of sarcasm. We need 1,500 workers. Brilliant. Flying in 1,500 people from the outside world at this point in time will break the chains of all command. And now I don't get the last line, will break the chains of all command. But anyway, I get the point. He's picking up on this story and he is putting it out there. And how many... I saw someone said earlier that it had 10 million views or whatever, right? So I would argue that there isn't a person in Ireland with as much voice as Conor McGregor has. So I very much appreciate this. And, people can say what they want about the guy. I respect him for this. And like I say, I don't think there's anyone in Ireland with as much of a voice, as much of a microphone. You could say Leo Varadkar. I actually doubt it, to be honest. Leo Varadkar has a voice, a kind of a RTE on it, and he has a Twitter and all this. He does have reach, but I don't think anyone in Ireland compares to Conor McGregor in terms of reach. So it's good that he's our guy, and I don't mean in all sorts of ways. He might not align with me or whatever. That's fine, but I mean our guy in the sense of common sense stuff that nobody else is willing to kind of talk about. The fact that this is something that I'm glad, fair play to him for stepping up and saying what needs to be said, just kind of telling it like it is stuff. The fact that the bar is so low that even this counts as that just goes to show how far we've fallen in a way, because all he is saying is complete common sense. And I think he gives nods towards Sinn Féin a little bit and whatever. I'm not asking him to be some kind of right-wing nationalist like Firebrand or whatever. I respect, to me, if someone's a bit on the populist side and they're a bit sincere and they ultimately have Irish interests at heart, even if at times they don't align exactly with me in certain ways, I'm willing to make compromises and to just kind of accept the good for the good. It doesn't have to be a full thing. If someone does good in certain ways, then I respect them at that level anyway. And I think as well, I think someone is saying here, someone says he loves the flag since before he made it big. I think he's a nationalist. Exactly. And again, he doesn't need to be a member of a certain nationalist type of party or this or that or whatever, or he doesn't need to be dead into it all. But the guy loves the flag. He's a working class guy. I think he knows bullshit and all of that when he sees it. So I can respect him to that extent. And it's great to see this. He did goodbye our nurses, just like Paddy Cosgrave did, speaking up to the kind of cabal, basically, of a media and a kind of a regime's communications kind of army we have in this country. So, I have to respect him for that. And again, back to this whole story. Never forget broccoli, man. Never forget this guy. Never forget Paul Brophy, IFA chairman. And he's also some massive broccoli farmer, big, not a small little farm, but one of these kind of, I would say, dodgy, the big farmers who avail of all these different government policies and swing them around and stuff. And they are, this isn't the average farmer. Not when he's getting 1,500 Bulgarians in to pick his crops, right? He's not a noble Irish farmer in my book. Anyway, that's Conor. Big respect to him. Wish him well. All of that. So what else have we got? Well, I want to have a look at the chat and I want to drink some tea. That's what I want to do. So who have we got? Oh yeah, Chopper says Foggy Dew entrance music. Our guy. Yeah, man, definitely. Someone says 2 nurses died in Kilkenny. Tom Kelly says, I'm not doubting you or anything, but I've no way of verifying that. I can't stand over that. But that's what Tom Kelly says. We have a lot of comments about broccoli. That's good. This will forever be remembered as the broccoli stream, won't it? Now remember, we still have a way to go. We still have to have a look at Blindboy, which will be brief enough, and then I want to get on to the Burkean thing, because I enjoy that, because I can kind of sit back like the rest of you. and I get less pressure to talk, or to whatever. If Conor McGregor could be managed, he would be a huge asset. Again, my thing is I wouldn't get too control freaky over this. Like, personally, I respect your point of view, but to me, I'm like, I'm not like, I wouldn't be like overly, that's what I was trying to say a while ago, wanting him to kind of hook, line and sinker, like go for the whole thing, probably using the wrong analogies, but just go in completely bought into all of this stuff, like this kind of nationalist discourse. It's like, it's a bit heavy, you know what I mean? I don't expect that of anybody. It would probably be wrong-headed anyway. You have to be a bit more, you have to be a bit broader in the way you think about things. But if he's boosting some of these important stories and saying what needs to be said about certain things, then, I'll be a fan. So what else have we got? Oh, there's some new chats. Last True Girl says, whatever you think of him, McGregor is on our whatever you think of him, McGregor on our side would be a huge victory for us. Yeah. And again, like that's Last True Girl there. The point I'm kind of making on that, just to reiterate once again, Last True Girl says, McGregor on our side. See, my only point there is that my definition of on our side is actually very broad. I like to keep that, my definition of that, my general feeling on that, as broad as I can. And one of the problems with radical kind of politics and ideologues and stuff, you will see, there's words for it these days, purity spiraler, blah, blah, blah. One of these problems some people have is that they want to keep the window of on our side as narrow as possible. And of course, all these things are nuanced because sometimes you need to trim off. It can't be if it's everything, then it's nothing. I understand that. But in terms of alliance and kind of diplomacy and some of these things just around the edges, I think in terms of having coherent discourse, it needs to be a little bit coherent and a little bit exclusive in a way. So it all depends on what you're talking about. None of this is gospel. Don't come at me like I'm saying something, a gospel or whatever. I'm not. I'm just speaking generally. Sometimes it's one way, and sometimes in terms of diplomacy and alliance forming and all of that, I think the approach of having your definition of someone being on your side, having that definition be as broad as you can possibly make it within any kind of reason, without it being preposterous. Having it as broad as you can is a good thing. And so when I want Conor to be on our side, on my side of things or whatever, that's a very big tent. So, here's hoping. And, he can do what he likes, whatever. Let's not simp too hard, right? So that's that. Shall I move on to the next story? And I actually have nothing prepared or even thought about. I have no thoughts on this, really. The well-known artist and podcaster Blindboy has strongly criticized the government's support for the arts sector. And if they're watching, they'll know who I'm talking about if they are watching. Someone, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about the arts. I mentioned the arts to them. I was talking about theater and literature, and they pulled me up and said, I hate the term the arts. And I was like, you're right, actually. I retract it. I just mean art and various things. The term the arts is extremely highly, intensely wanky. So, he's criticized the government's support for the arts sector in light of COVID-19. It has been financially devastating for him and many other artists. It's hard to sympathize. I mean, for one, I don't want artists. Yeah, as martial law says. Really, the Last True Girl. Sorry, I'm learning here because I just pulled this one up last minute. Last True Girl says, I kind of feel sorry for him. He seems to be melting down a bit, according to the article. Well, of course, I don't wish any bad on someone like that. If someone's in a bad place, you don't want them to be in a bad place. No, that doesn't mean you can't criticize, for Christ's sake, public figures or whatever are out there for this stuff. Same way you could criticize, if I'm putting out a point of view here, I couldn't just hide behind, if I was to say, oh, well, I'm in a bad place. So anyway, just to make that point. But I do want to read through it and look, maybe there's more to this. Maybe it's justified. But on the face of it, at least, to start with, my immediate reaction is like, first off, I don't like this idea of having government comedy. This whole idea that, like, I don't know if he's financially supported. Yeah, it says it's been financially devastating for him, and he's talking about government support. So if I'm to draw the conclusion from that, it's like we have government funded. Not only do we have government funded comedy, right? And they haven't been funny since, like, the pet or they, he, whatever, hasn't been funny since the pet shop prank calls, which granted were kind of funny. Everything since has been they're like, oh, I've got a sham accent. Oh, I'm like a sham, like I'm normal. This kind of is so contrived and not funny to me. So we have government government comedy, right? Imagine how good. Like, imagine if the government do some things well, but imagine if the government made you a suit, tailored your suit for you, or government perfume. I don't think it would be the best in the world, right? And the same goes for government artists, government comedians. And this is all a bit nuanced, because I do support the government. I supporting art in a certain way, but, like, a lot of this is highly ideological, kind of what would you call it? Socialite, kind of part of the scene, kind of stuff like that. It's not this whole idea of you have this objectively amazing sculptor, like a genius, who just needs a stipend. If there's if you have like a Michelangelo going on, right? I would fully support the idea of putting him on a decent stipend for the rest of his life if he keeps making works, right? And we can put these massive, glorious statues all over the country, right? Fine. It depends what you're talking about. But this plastic guy with a plastic bag over his head, talking about, like, whatever, this kind of progressive stuff and doing this kind of poor comedy, is not the aforementioned Michelangelo. So yeah, and also just being a propagandist for a kind of progressive neoliberal, he would not like that characterization. But I think ultimately, whether he knows it or not, he supports neoliberalism, or its major tenets anyway, in a certain way. Yeah, I don't support them being supported by the government. And not only is it government supported art, but it's government supported. It's kind of like, when he goes on the Late Late Show and gives, like, his kind of Ryan Tuberty, his kind of pound shop kind of version of, like, a Russell Brand rant. And we're all meant to go, whoa, the voice of a generation. This is the new game in town. This is like some mad stuff, right? This kind of, oh my God, our generation has been sold out, which is true, but, like, this kind of stuff. And then connected up to this kind of, the reason men are depressed is because of they're not feminist, or this kind of shit. It's like, it's not only a government funded government artist, it's a government. You have government issue voices of a generation. It's like he goes in with his form, and the person at the desk stamps it and gives him a stipend. There you go. This is your voice of a generation stipend, Blindboy. Off you go. Off you go to rail against the system. Here's your permit. Here's your stipend. We celebrate and adore you. We'll see you at the Doggy Book Festival. Well, this kind of shit. It's like, it's hard to sympathize, right? But so that's that. I just want to have a look at the the comments are always funny. Man with plastic bag on his head wants to be made priority, right? Yeah, so let's look at the article. I will have a look. Brief look. Well-known artist and podcaster, the artist formerly known as Blindboy, has strongly criticized the government's support for the art sector in light of COVID-19. He told RTE News at 1, it was like they didn't speak or listen to any actual artists. Describing the response as terrible, Blindboy said, it's not just, by the way, here's the other thing, is like, you have an immediate, this whole voice of a generation kind of dissident type of stuff. He can just have an RTE article like that. Can you get that? Can I get that? Can I, for example, I don't know, one of my big things is, Walshy says, just so you know, government-supported art accounts for a huge amount of traditional Irish concerts, folk concerts, and jazz concerts. Yeah, no, that's why I was saying a while ago. If that's why I did add that it depends on context. It's kind of, I try not to be too black and white about stuff and remain a bit nuanced. I use Michelangelo as my example. If someone's a Michelangelo, I'd fund them. Of course, I would give the same grant the same respect to traditional Irish music, all sorts of music and stuff like that. I'm not so much saying government funded art is inherently bad in itself and shouldn't be done. In fact, I just said a few minutes ago, I support that. It's the idea of having a government funded voice of a generation. A government funded comedian is one thing, to go to clubs, to do all this. But this guy who becomes the star face, the late show man, the kind of political commentator, this kind of kind of like a political commentator, to end up being a kind of a government supported thing. And it's not even necessarily the fact that he's funded by the government, to me, in terms of a stipend or money, right? These things are drops in a bucket, right? It's more just, I'm more getting at the fact that he's almost government supported in ways that are much more important than a stipend or some kind of money. It's that he's almost like this beatified, if that's a word, not benighted. I can't think of the word. Like when someone gets knighted or whatever, this kind of voice of a generation. You are the artist. You are the whatever, by the kind of general state, the RTE state, the kind of D4 set, like I say, the Dalkey Book Club, all of that kind of stuff. The idea that he's supported in all that kind of ways and vaunted up, it just makes me a little bit cynical, when I see him complain about pretty much anything. But in terms of government supporting the arts, I've said it again, supporting music and supporting culture, I have nothing against it. It's specific to this kind of stuff. And you know what? It's also this kind of theater about equality and diversity and all this kind of stuff. It's when it becomes overtly political, and political in a way that lines up with state politics, I get annoyed. And Blindboy is an example of that. Whereas trad bands who tour the country and play bars and play old folks' homes, play big concerts, play whatever, right? Getting grants. That's not a political act, and they are not a political entity. So I just think the distinctions there are important. But I take that point there from Walshy. But when you're looking at someone like Blindboy, it's different to me. I'm trying to think of other examples of this highly politicized kind of comedy, whereas comedy is really a form of propaganda in its own way as well. Walshy says again, there's a huge amount of government funding every year for traditional Irish music from the Arts Council, Culture Ireland, and Music Network. Yeah, this cultural support, and again, like for example with physical art like sculpturing and all that kind of stuff, objective works of beauty, stuff like just music is pretty non-political in its own right. But this whole idea that you have a feminist podcaster, comedian, article in RTE, goes on the Late Show type of person, who also kind of that set of people get funded by the government. The issue I have from my point of view, right, is that let's say me and some of my lads, kind of nationalists, whatever, get together. First off, we wouldn't be able to go to a comedy place, even if the comedy wasn't racist or any of that, just normal comedy, right, with a tinge of our politicization on it. And first off, not only would we not get government grants, right, for it, we wouldn't be able to get the venue. You would have government-funded NGOs organizing riots and violence against us. So, whether it were comedy or any kind of slightly politicized thing, to be honest, even if we were playing like trad music and got a government grant, but we were openly known as some. Actually, I don't want to bring music into it because, again, I think music sits in a different place. But just this kind of politicized art. Again, we'd be hounded out of it by NGO or government-funded NGOs who stir up mobs, most of them literally paid by government-funded NGOs, to actually do violence against us, try to research every last facet of our lives in any way they can, and dox and all of this. Coming from the position of where I'm at in that situation, that's why I look at something like Blindboy. related to government funding and support and all of this. And I if I come across as a bit sour grapes, it's for that reason. When you're looking at it from that point of view, it's very difficult not to be cynical about that. But I want to separate that from the government supporting art in terms of trad bands, this, that, and the other, all sorts of music, all sorts of non-political art or whatever. No problem with it. Anyway, I'll keep reading the article. Yeah, he said, it's as if they didn't speak or listen to any actual artists. Describing the response as terrible, Blindboy said, it's not just writers and performers who are affected. It's people working as sound engineers on live events, on light stage managers, actors. The entire creative community is out of work. And again, that's kind of the issue as well, is like, so again, an individual band or this or that, or certain normal just music or art of any description being kind of funded is one thing. But what you see is there is a kind of, when he says the entire creative community, I'm not in that world, so I don't know in detail, but there is an element of that community being not just a community of people who are creative and do stuff, but a kind of a clique. And the clique is shot through with highly politicized types of people, right? Radically, whatever you want to call it, people, right? And is resistive to people with other points of view. And it's not just even whether you openly have a different political point of view, but it's like almost if you're a different type of person at all. If you're a not super woke progressive person, if I can put it that way, then there's a little bit of a thing. It's a highly cliqueified world. So when he says entire creative community, I kind of go, it's a little bit of a guarded community and a little bit of a circle jerk in its own way, to use an American phrase. But again, fine. This is not a screed against supporting art at all. I feel like it's important for me to clarify that. The response tells me that government does not view art as a true vocation. Blindboy said he has suffered huge financial loss as a result of. Okay, I don't want to pick over the bones or the carcass there. Nobody wants someone to suffer financially, whatever they happen to do. So blah blah blah. What does he say? I mean, okay, so I was in the middle of a UK tour and had to postpone a sold-out gig in London. The British government had not cancelled mass events, so I was left with huge financial debt by pulling the gig that morning. Okay, I mean, again, there is just the, like, this speaks to how much of a voice and just complete access this guy has to the media institutions and stuff in Ireland, because, how many people are there out there who work in this or that, who have like their story of like, I've gotten bollocksed out of it because of the pandemic, where I was supposed to be doing this and then I lost on this and then I lost on that. Now I'm fucking screwed on this and whatever. But they don't get to write their essay down for the entire country like this. Let's say it's a taxi driver, right? There might be a bit of an article alluding to Taxi Driver Association of Ireland has said this or whatever, but will any random taxi driver just get to say, boom, here's my story? Whereas someone like Blindboy does, he gets to call. I saw one recently that like Doireann Garrahy, here's a good example of it. Doireann Garrahy tweeted out when, after the Taoiseach made his famous speech a few weeks ago, she said, oh, that was so inspiring. I'm in tears crying. It was so amazing. And people on Twitter roasted her, right? And then I saw this thing on like goss.ie, some kind of magazine, where it's like Doireann Garrahy was targeted on Twitter. Obviously, they email her, they know her, something like that, right? And it's like, hey, yeah, whatever. And you get your little blog in the media. And it's the same with this. And again, that's why I'm less sympathetic. It's like, this isn't just some trad musician who plays in a band, and it's good to support that. It's a guy who gets to be a voice, a political voice for everybody else, and gets just an open article here to talk about his woes, which I don't wish on him at all in specific. I don't have an issue with the fact that he has a problem, or I don't take any delight in it. And I don't bemoan the fact that he necessarily has a voice, I suppose, although I kind of do. The fact that, he could just call up the newspapers and whatever. It's like, we're not talking about an artist here. We're talking about a political propagandist, effectively, who just has the speed dial for all the media and everything else. Anyway, he's just one of 100 writers and actors involved in the new Abbey Theatre initiative. blah blah blah. Okay, so it's about some of his work. So I'm sure she is very open-minded and would like this person here. What is she? IMRO chairperson. What's the IMRO? If anybody here knows what the IMRO is, let me know. Okay, never mind. Where are we at? Where are we at, lads? We're going to go on to the Burkean thing now. Yeah. Actually, why was that? Why was she pictured? I don't get it. Maybe she was quoted. Okay. The Irish Music Rights Organisation have said the European Directive on Copyright must be implemented to help pay musicians for work streamed online. Musicians' incomes have been hit badly since the pandemic, with tours cancelled and gigs postponed. Many are now doing online performances, which have been attracting huge audiences. That's a good idea, actually. I didn't know as well, by the way, that if you booked a gig and if it was cancelled in a certain way, that you would end up being on the hook for it. I thought you would just lose out on the proceeds you would have made from the gig. Yeah, Emmanuel Godson is in the chat, who is a painter, who is, I suppose you could say, a somewhat politicized, right, painter. I don't know your work to the full extent, Emmanuel, but you know it's a bit political in ways, right? In the same way as, you know, the repeal kind of crowd, or whatever you want to call them, the woke crowd are. Emmanuel, what would happen if do you think you could access, tell us in the chat, do you think you could access any kind of support for your painting work? And maybe you could, maybe you just haven't tried, I don't know, but let me know what your intuition or feeling is on that. Walshy, the musician, hit badly is a massive understatement. Literally all of the work for the next year is gone. I mean, that's shit. And you know what, when having a discussion as well about support of the arts, or the art, or the whatever, right, whether it's this politicized stuff or whether it's normal music or whatever, you can have all sorts of people with all different types of opinions on this specific thing. But the important thing to recognize as well is that discussing it in this light is a little bit different, because it's the middle of a pandemic. Like half the country's been laid off, right, or whatever, is having issues. And states across the world are doing basically UBI measures of various descriptions, universal basic income, to support all sorts of people who've been made unemployed and all of this kind of stuff. Whether you're a bus driver or a flute player or whatever, right? Whatever you are, if your income is gone, basically universalized kind of dole for people who need it, right? Like they've done in America and various other places. So this isn't, you know, whatever you would say about supporting various types of art under various different conditions, and that argument could be had 100 different ways. That argument stands slightly apart from what's going on at the moment. So it'd be like talking about, let's say, taxis, a debate about how taxis should be licensed and taxed and funded and all of this kind of stuff. That would be a conversation you could have had 6 months ago. But having a conversation about where they stand now is it's a whole other story. So I do feel like this conversation almost gets a little bit convoluted on that basis. So yeah, I mean, what else do we have? Some are doing these free of charge. Others are using online tipping. I think musicians should, like, for example, if a musician were to go online and play some of their best stuff and talk about the process of it. And here's just the thing that comes to my mind, is to actually play the music, something they've written or whatever. But while it's almost like a live commentary, I'm really going off on a tangent here, but you know, when you watch a film and you put on the director's commentary, so the film's happening, but you're more listening to the commentary about how the set was designed and what happened with this actor and funny issues and, you know, logistics and all of this kind of stuff. For the person playing the music to kind of stop in between and be like, I spent half an hour on these couple of notes here, And I was trying to think of this, which made me come up with the music and talk you through the process and all of that while playing, and sometimes going off on a kind of a little bit of a jam for 5 minutes quietly, and just a kind of I don't know, almost like a musical live stream. I think I would tune into, and to use tipping and pay, or what is it? It's not PayPal. It's that kind of stuff. Tip jar or whatever it is. These kind of basically crowdfund kind of things. I'm such a boomer because Chopper says there's an app for that already. Gee, it's called Cameo. I didn't know. But okay, so this is one of these things where this is like when I discover that breakfast, is a good idea, or that flasks are good for keeping drinks warm or whatever. I stumble across like a thing that everybody knows. I did know that flasks keep drinks warm. I'm exaggerating on that, but so this thing exists, and I just had a eureka moment about it. Anyway, so I think we've said enough about that. I'm going to go on to the Burkean thing. So let's just go straight for it. I'm familiar with. I've seen her around the place and stuff, right? One of these people. Her name is Dr. Lucy Michael. She's an expert in anti-racism, an expert in immigration, all of this stuff, right? Of course. It's like NASA or something. So this is the latest part of an undercover investigation into the tacit and sometimes overt. Sorry, excuse me. The last true girl says, "Holy fuck, they got Lucy." Yeah, it seems so. No, some of their ones are juicier than others. Don't get yourself too excited. I haven't heard this yet, but it could be a stinger. It could be a standard one. No matter, they're always interesting to listen to. Latest part of blah de blah. Dr. Lucy Michael is an academic. I hope the audio works for this, by the way. Is an academic active in a variety of anti-racist NGOs and initiatives across Ireland. A self-described expert on immigration and diversity, she holds a PhD in criminology from Keele University. Dr. Michael has been an active contributor to a range of anti-racist organisations, among those the Open Society-funded Irish Network Against Racism, INAR, noted for its participation in Antifa events and consultation with the state and social media giants regarding hate speech. Dr. Michael now works for the International Organization for Migration, lovely, a UN-affiliated organization headed up by an important member of the Portuguese Socialist Party. Recently, she has been the apparent driving force behind the anti-racist activist group Fingal Communities Against Racism, which was directly set up to oppose a nationalist candidate who was running there, wasn't it? As far as I can see, it's the apparent purpose of which was to challenge journalist. Oh, there we go, Gemma O'Doherty's general election campaign. I have to stop belching into the microphone. I'm going to have to. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But so our undercover reporters made contact with Dr. Michael over her personal Twitter, where they introduced themselves. They what? They. Is this a gender thing, or is it just a typo, or is it just the way they phrased it? Oh no, they say Dr. Michael over her personal Twitter, where they introduced themselves as fellow anti-fra. Oh, sorry, I'm reading it wrong. Forgive me, everybody. I'm sorry. Okay, you can read. I can't. So in the records, Dr. Michael promised to pass on the contact information of Irish Antifa to the Far Right Observatory, quote unquote, a seemingly informal grouping of progressive actors looking to suppress those suspected of being involved in right-leaning politics. When asked about the risk of using violence, Dr. Michael replied that I wouldn't say no, but stressed the need to keep a broad front against the far right. Okay, let's just listen to it, lads. Here we go. And I am going to do a sound check first. Or just, here's what to do. Just give me a quick 1 in the chat if you're hearing it okay, and a 2 if you're not. So I'm just going to plow on. Yep, that's funny. Mm-hmm. Wait, solatiums or whatever. Oh, you can't hear a thing? Ah, lads. Oh, lads, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? Okay. Okay, we're getting a nod on the sound. I really... Oh, well, if it comes to it, I'll just have to do the... I'll have to do the... I'll just play it out loud from the mic. So... Okay, give me another 1, 2 here. Someone says they can hear me breathing. Okay, I can mute my mic because I don't want you to hear that too much. So,
all right, there's plenty of need for overlap and networking.
Give me a 1, give me a 2.
And yeah, so basically,
And
what
then
we're
we'll
hoping
just
to
go
sort of
to-
specialise in over the next while is to sort of compile a sort of database on the sort of far right in Ireland, sort of some of the more smaller actors.
Someone says 1, so you can hear it. Okay, good. It's very strange, but there's no point in me trying to get into it, but it's very weird why that's happening. It kind of shouldn't be happening in the first place, but anyway. Okay, so let's listen, right? Back to the start. Apologies for that.
Hello?
Hello, Dr. Lucy Michael, is it?
It is, yes.
Hi, this is Ryan from Irish Students Against Fascism. We were...
Hi, Ryan. Nice to hear from you.
Oh, that's grand. Do you have a few moments to talk?
I do indeed, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Close over my door so I can talk to you in peace. Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, so a basic introduction of who we are and what we do. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with what you do. We're a group of sort of students that came together in sort of third level, and we're sort of coordinating against far right on campus and elsewhere. And we're basically, what we're doing is sort of reaching out to sort of civic society bodies and just people in journalism and just building a sort of anti-racist network. Obviously, that's a lot of overlap with what you guys do in INR.
That's all right. There's plenty of need for overlap and networking.
Yeah, that's grand. Yeah, so basically what we're hoping to sort of specialise in over the
stiff.
next while is to sort of
I'm sure
compile
she's
a sort
lovely.
of database on the sort of far right in Ireland, sort of some of the more smaller actors, and just have that as a sort of resource for activists, like something like Searchlight, something like Hope Not Hate, something like some sort of guidebook.
Okay.
So any sort of intel you have on some of the sort of smaller sort of actors, feel free to sort of message.
Are you hooked in at all with the Far Right Observatory?
I know that's a Continental institute, but or is it our?
No, Far Right Observatory is a group of basically anti-far right activists from different organisations. But they are tracking already what you were hoping to track.
Okay.
And use that to disseminate.
It's like the Freemasons of anti-racism or whatever, a shadowy group. It's like Spectre.
Out to various groups across Ireland. So I wonder whether it'd be more useful for you to hook in with them and have a common resource that you could feed in with them and you'd get more information back as well.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent contact. Just regarding yourself, what sort of anti-racist or sort of anti-fascist activity have you sort of partaken in, for example? Just out of curiosity.
My work my professional work has always been around recording racist incidents and racist discrimination. But last year we set up Fingal Communities Against Racism, because Gemma O'Doherty said she was standing at Fingal. So as soon as she started indicating that, we established Fingal Communities Against Racism, and that essentially brings together local activists from across the county who we have known through various other kind of activities. So some we've met through marriage equality, some we've met through repeal, others we knew through local politics. And so we pretty much have people from almost every political party and perspective in FCAR, which makes it very useful for talking to the election candidates, but also talking to all of their campaign teams and so on. And then obviously our activists are spread right across the county, from the very north and west right down to the southern tips. So it's very local in that sense. It's absolutely about geographically bounded, on the ground. And so we would have networks of information with people in other places. But ours is absolutely about driving them out at the very local level. So
okay. You're okay getting potentially physical with these people? Like, obviously, it's to be avoided, but you're okay with that, or doing
Hi, lads. Okay, I'm going to be totally honest with you there. I took a little break for like 30 seconds, so I'm actually going to go back, which is very bad form because you're watching this, and but you know, c'est la vie. I'm going to go back about 30 seconds or so because I know she was just talking about violence, and I just want to hear that. So do me that favor there, lads, and let me know if you're hearing me okay, or just let me know if anything's wrong, because I had to adjust the settings there.
Spread
So
right across the county from the very north and west right down to the southern tip. So it's very local in that sense. It's absolutely about geographically bounded, on the ground, and so we would have we'd have networks of information with people in other places. But ours is absolutely about driving them out at the very local level. So
Okay. You're okay getting potentially physical with these people? Like, obviously, it's to be avoided, but you're okay with that, or do what needs to be done, basically.
I wouldn't say no. Our activism has been about protesting, has been about drawing attention of people.
as far as I can gather there, she said I wouldn't say no. Again, if I said that, I'm telling you now, if I said that, if one of these guys called me up acting like an ally or a friend, and basically the reverse of this, right? And I said, no, people have said much worse. She's actually kept her P's and Q's, or whatever the phrase is. She's kept it together a little bit better than some of the others. But even that, if someone called me up as a honeypot, recorded me, and was talking about anti-racists or even foreigners, right? Yeah, that's a good example. Let's say direct provision. I've had my issues with direct provision, like direct plantation, the asylum industry. The issue has never, from my perspective, been against asylum seekers, migrants themselves, not particularly, right? It's the ones who facilitated the Irish side. It's the system itself that I have an issue with, right? But regardless, I've been accused, the accusation would be that you hate these people or whatever, right? So given that that's the accusation, whatever, right? If someone called me up, stinging me like this and said, oh yeah, like these asylum seekers are wandering around these towns, was it Ballinamore, one of these things, where a lady was raped? I think it was Ballinamore by someone, we'll say, and where like the entire town seemed to say in unison at one point that they were all intimidated on their streets and they didn't feel like they were at home anymore, basically, this kind of stuff, right? If I was to say where I'm going with this, on a sting call, if someone said, what if someone just said, how would you feel about like violence? And I said, I wouldn't say no, or something like that, right? I mean, if I said that, I do think I would have the guards at my door, probably. Again, that's speculation, so I have to go easy. But I think it's very reasonable to say that I would have the guards at my door about that. If I said I wouldn't say no in terms of violence to these people, and here's the trick: I wouldn't say that on a phone call to a sting or a honeypot or someone who I know for sure isn't a honeypot. I wouldn't say that because I don't believe it. I don't advocate for it. And even if I did, which I don't, I wouldn't be stupid enough to say it. Or more importantly, I wouldn't feel emboldened enough, like she does, that that's something you can just say and is like, kind of in the back of your mind, you're like, even if it was a honeypot, I'm kind of backed up anyway. These people can have violence done against them. These populist nationalists, whatever she calls it, racist, right? That ultimately it's like, well, you're going to be grand anyway. It's like Leah Doherty throwing a drink over Gran Torino, throwing a thing over him, right? And like there's this feeling of impunity, Whereas if I was to do that to any of them, imagine this, like it doesn't even cross my mind, but the shit you or I would be in if we said that and were stung on the phone. Not only would you have the guards at your door, but this would be plastered all over every newspaper and all of this. And your life would be made an absolute misery. You'd be hounded out of any job you're in. and all of this kind of stuff, and you'd be treated like a kind of a Timothy McVeigh kind of type of figure, you know, this dangerous, violent. It's this kind of like, it's happening again. It's like Crystal Knocked or something. But with her, it's like, oh, whatever. She wears a pantsuit type of thing, and she works with the International Organization for Migration. And when she says it, it's just whatever.
Of people, the fact that the far right are trying to use election politics. So we haven't been involved in organising any protests.
Okay.
But remember, we're really a coordination for people from a whole range of different political views. So there will be people in our group who are involved in every type of protest and disruption, from one end
Disruption
to the other.
Okay. You certainly wouldn't disavow, or how it works. Basically, you wouldn't. You find with sort of liberals, they have a tendency to sort of disavow people and sort of anti-fascism.
Yeah, I mean, my professional and my personal opinion versus what I do in FCAR are slightly separate, because FCAR is simply about coordinating, and it has to be a broad base because we have so many broad political perspectives in it.
Okay, that's fair. So for example, would you have like Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, like traditionally non-left parties, or?
I mean, the full range of political parties is involved in FCAR.
Okay, that's good. So how many?
And the point of it is to make sure that the centre doesn't move right.
Yeah.
So you saw in the last campaign, you had Verona Murphy in Fine Gael.
What did she say there? She kind of bores me slightly, so I need to listen again.
Yeah.
So you saw in the last campaign, you had Verona Murphy in Fine Gael. You had the issues with Lorraine in Fianna Fáil. So at that party level, we're really aware that there is a risk of any of the mainstream parties moving further right.
Okay.
If they see that. So what we're really trying.
Again, for those who weren't, at the back, right? Why do we have a class of people, like, again, she's part of this International Organization for Migration, which is part of the UN, which is ultimately state-funded and state-sanctioned, like, kind of a role, right? And probably part of, linked in with all these other NGOs. Why do we have this class of people that kind of transcends politics? I mean, we elect politicians, and she's saying there's this danger of these Verona Murphys and whatever your man's name is, Grealish, and all these people moving a little bit to the right, moderately to the right, this kind of thing, right? That's a risk, and that's something we have to watch out for and disrupt, and this and that. Who elected you, Dr. Lucy Michael? Who voted for you to be in this position? How many people, if we were to take a vote, would support this, your activity against elected officials? This kind of interloper, political operative. Who the fuck are you in the first place? And yeah, who the fuck is that guy? Type of thing. To return to a McGregor line. And what gives you the right to think you have this authority to, in a professional capacity, to interlope into our political system like this? If politicians move to the right, that's what they call the democratic process happening, right? Politicians move to the right, left, to the right, up, down, whatever, right? Where are all of these interlopers and activists that are paid by the state ultimately, who are saying, well, we have some people drifting to the left, so we have to cut that off with subversion, with propaganda, with harassment campaigns, with all of this stuff? That's a tyranny. We're in a complete Bolshevik tyranny, basically.
Do is build a middle ground
with this shit. Sorry. And if you think I'm making it up, then go on away, because it's right here in front of us, and this isn't the only video. For those people who kind of roll the eyes and go, here you are again with the kind of grand notion, pulling things together. It's like, I'm not pulling things together at all in any kind of overdue way. This is one video after another, and after another. It's left, right, and center. To deny it is a conspiracy theory.
On the Gemmas and co-on directory, and mainstream politics. So there's a middle ground in between that we're trying to mobilise.
Okay, that's very fair. In terms of like numbers and sort of upcoming projects, I know it's sort of general election. What would you have like upcoming, like just out of curiosity yourselves?
What do you mean in terms of numbers?
Like say for say,
I feel like she sounds like she's got a stick up her backside a little bit. I think that is potentially partially due to the fact that she might be twigging him a little bit. If she hasn't twigged him, I think she's becoming more cautious. I think I can hear that in her voice, a little bit of cautiousness starting to enter the room. Good night. Someone there seems to be leaving. Good night, Colette, I think it is. See ya. Thanks for watching as well. I appreciate it.
station, like I was at sort of the Bulgarian sort of standoff on was it Sunday? There was a sort of about 100 of us, but like, so like generally in FCAR, how many like boots on the ground could you like potentially provide if need be?
It's hard to say because each action is quite different. So because we have such a range of activities, it is really hard to say what we would have in terms of anyone turning up at any one time. What we have.
Is that a D4 accent or is it just me? I'm not an expert. It sounds a bit D4-y. I could be wrong. And the audio's a bit off.
Like students, what we have is a lot of people who are parents, who are in full-time jobs and so on.
Yes.
So there are real commitment issues, but those are the people who are bringing the message into workplaces, into sports clubs, into their children's schools, who are in full-time jobs in places where these kinds of attitudes are circulating. So I think we have quite a different target to what you have.
Okay, that's fair enough. Obviously, it has to be broad-based and multifoliated.
It has to be because, and we also have to, and so we tend to hang back on some things and let people make their own individual minds up. So we do a lot of information sharing about what's happening, but we don't call people out to do specific things because
we don't call. I that's my like calling card for a posh person when they say when they like the word call, like CALL, it sounds more like CAWL. Coal or COWL, coal. It's very Anglo-y. It's just a little thing. Anyway.
To do that, we ask people to make up their own minds.
Yeah, there's a social strain, I understand.
Yeah, there's times where we've asked people to do things which we thought were, perfectly, things that they would absolutely turn up for that they just haven't, and a lot of that is around commitment.
Okay.
They have to see that it's effective enough to be worth giving up their time for because they have to arrange childminders or take time off work or whatever. And it also has to be, but it will depend on what their political views are and their views of what it means to disrupt fascism. So, I'd say we would have a definition of disrupting fascism, which is as much about disrupting it at the conversation level, rather than direct confrontation.
Yeah, that's fair. It's to be avoidable. You're okay potentially like down the line, if it has to come to that basically.
He's really putting it out on the line there. It's going kind of, going all in, like going for broke. Eventually, if it came to it, I just want to, because he has to. But it's just funny. Let's see how she reacts here.
I suppose
that would depend on what our members decide they want to do.
Okay, that's fair.
But we don't have a committee. We don't have a constitution. We're a coordination network.
Okay.
But we don't have any of that. So I can't say we have X number of members and they're all signed up to the same thing because the only common thing is about keeping everybody on focused on shifting those attitudes at local level. And so we're really about changing attitudes rather than the kind of direct disruption. That's not to say that our members aren't engaged in it's direct disruption. But in terms of going out there as single communities against racism, that's very much the electoral politics, the posters around the place, the getting people to talk about the attitudes, looking for radicalisation in their kids, that kind of level of stuff.
Yeah.
I love that kind of radicalization in your kids thing. Back in the day, it was if your kids were listening to like devil music, and now it's like and it's not even too radical stuff, but like some like you think of some like feminist radical woke mother with her little boy, who I kind of feel sorry for little boys who are in this position, or growing boys like teenagers or whatever, who their mother comes into the room and they're listening to like something mild, like a Ben Shapiro video or something like that, you know, and they shut down the screen and hide it. And their mother sits them down for a big talk. You know, it's just funny how it's come around full circle like that. But let's see what more she has to say. So stepping in when children are radicalized. This is extreme stuff. Like I was talking about, having these political interlopers into your democratic system for when the elected candidates or the candidates themselves before they're elected are not quite saying what you want them to say, to step in and interlope and try to subvert that based on no mandate, no whatever. And these are the people who would shout about liberalism and democracy and stuff. It's ridiculous. And then on the other hand, de-radicalizing children. This is not kids like, you know, who are playing with like petrol bombs and stuff, or like, you know, plotting to blow up buildings or some weird stuff like that, right? That's what it comes across as. That's what it's spoken of as. No, it would be someone who's like, it wouldn't even be the far out stuff, like this kind of I don't even want to say, so, you know, I don't want to implicate, but, you know, some of this further way out right stuff. It could be like, it could be people who are just saying like, I think, you know, like West is the best, or kind of Gavin McInnes level stuff, that kind of thing. You know, I can guarantee you, she would classify something like listening to Gavin McInnes or expounding whatever the word is, putting across those points of view, Gavin McInnesism, that level or whatever, that kind of thing, she would count as being radicalized, being whatever. So again, it's not only interfering in your democracy, literally, like, you know, threat to our democracy stuff, but also like stepping in on kids, which is an active form of propagandization. It's like, you know, that is a form of propaganda to try and interfere in kids, like teenagers, to say they're being radicalized. Imagine how scary that would be as a kid if you were like ratted out by your parents or in school or something like that, and they were like talked to you about it and stuff. That is disgusting. Like, you know, again, if a 16-year-old comes out and says, I'm against climate change, and I'm look at Thunberg or whatever, I support, you know, an open society and one world. Like, kids are allowed to come out and say they support a one world government, basically, and they're given like days off school to protest the government, which the government, like, you know, government institutions are the ones who tell the kids to do that, right? They're allowed to do that. But if they were doing something to the, whatever it is, to the right, to the, off the reservation, they're being radicalized. It's insane what's happening with this stuff. And again, who is she? You know, what mandate did she get from anybody?
I'm very curious. You mentioned radicalization in your kids. How would that go about? Just like spotting signs, or?
Yeah.
And sorry, that's why I say, what mandate did she get from anybody? The reason I say that is because someone could say to me, well, Gerard, what mandate did anybody give you? I'm just on YouTube. It's an open platform and I'm just using it, right? There's nobody like, I'm not vaunted up by, it's a lot of words I keep saying and I'm getting unsure of them. I'm not lifted up by any kind of institutional thing or by the state or by the UN or any of that stuff, right? So yes, I have a political point of view and objectives and all of that. But I'm just a person acting freely in society of my own accord. She's not. That's the difference you have to remember, is that this isn't just if she just had a point of view, a YouTube channel, a WordPress blog, even if whatever, it's like, that'd be a different story. Then she would just be someone who I disagree with and I think is bad. But this, it's a whole other thing I'm discussing. I'm not coming on here to say she has a point of view which I don't like. It's far more important than that, because that would be a small issue ultimately. It's about the institutional power.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, my own cousin, well, my cousin's child rather, as a teenage boy, came home one day spouting a whole lot of pro-Trump stuff, and the family.
What did I tell you? I tried to tell you a while ago that I guarantee you, and I was putting myself on the line there to say, was I right or was I right? No, they come back spouting, she says, because it's always, if you have that point of view, Trump stuff, which is way less than Gavin McInnes, right? Who isn't even that far in any way, right? So it's Trump. Bear in mind, this is the democratically elected president of the global hegemon, the biggest country in the West. He is the elected president. He's not some elected, like, obscure governor somewhere. He's the elected president of the United States, right? To call that an extremist point of view is just by definition silly. And yet she's saying that, my friend's boy came home and he was like spouting like Trump rubbish, and that's one thing, but it's like she's talking about radicalization, and there's basically government programs supporting her to do this kind of stuff. It's absolutely insane. The elected president of the US, and he's spouting, and that's the other thing. He doesn't come home putting forward those ideas. He doesn't come home with that point of view. No. He comes home spouting. He comes home spewing. He comes home fueled. He comes home stoked. He comes home provoked. He comes home oozing bile, vile, hate. What else is there? Bile, vile. What else is there? There's spreading hate and all this stuff. It's all this like dehumanizing, horrible language, puking, oozing this vitriolic whatever. It's the same, and it's always whatever. I don't know the like logistics of language, like a verb from an adverb, or what. I know what verbs are, but like the structure. So whichever one it is. But that stoking, fueling, spewing, and then inserting a vile, bile, whatever, you can almost do like a little map, and there's about like 10 on each side, and it'll be one of them. And of course, here she is with, I just gone back a bit here. I think it was spouting. I think it was.
A teenage boy came home one day spouting a whole lot of pro-Trump stuff. And the family laughed it off, but I was kind of concerned about it because the things that I was kind of hearing him say were quite unlike the boy that he had been. And when I did a bit of digging, it turned out that he really had been radicalised, and in that case, in the playground. In a secondary school, an older kid had taken him under his wing and convinced him that this was the way things were going to be. It took a while.
I keep having to go back a bit. Look, short attention span. Was he radicalized on the playground?
An older kid had taken him under his wing and convinced him that this was the way things. That he really had been radicalized, and in that case, in the playground. In a secondary school, an older kid had taken him under his wing and convinced him that this was the way things were going to be. It took a while for him to get out from that. But it took the family taking it quite seriously before he realised what he'd been.
Yeah.
Whereas the family laughing it off actually drove him further into it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So we're trying to develop resources to say, how can we have those difficult conversations? We have a campaign launching tomorrow about difficult conversations ahead of the election, and then longer term over the next couple of months it'll be about digging into that de-radicalisation.
Okay. Just you're also employed with sort of INR Ireland. What's your sort of role? You mentioned sort of some sort of state consultation. Is that true to say, or?
Yeah, so I was at the university, at Ulster University, and I designed their racist incident reporting system 5 years ago.
iReport, yes.
And I worked on that pro bono for 5 years.
Okay.
So that's always been my pro bono work. And so I've recently done a contract with them for Surge to bring.
It kind of comes full circle here. There's no way you could pay Irish workers to pick our own crops. There's no way you could pay them a legitimate wage that would basically get people to do it, and raise the wage enough that people will do the job and get it done, right? There's no way you could do that. It's just not feasible. We couldn't eat broccoli. There's no way. There's no value for it. It's not valuable enough like banking and being a landlord is. There's no need or value for it, unfortunately. We have to bring 1,500 Bulgarians in charter flights during a pandemic just because there's no value to it ultimately is that we can't pay them a few euro more, but we can pay Dr. Lucy Michael. We can pay her, or whether it's the UN internet, it's all the one, right? She can be paid under this economic system. There's a logic under which she can, her work, her iReport, 5 years or something on iReport, de-radicalizing children on the playground from being like MAGA, which is just like, I'm still reeling from that. There's enough of an economic, a kind of an essential economic value to that for her to get paid. And I shudder to think what she does get paid. I'm sure it ain't no minimum wage, right? It's insane. Just wanted to kind of do a little full circle on that there, but think about that. Anyway, we go forward.
Bring that to Viva, but most of my work with them is pro bono.
Okay, that's fair.
Pro bono.
Just in general, it's like sort of anti-fascist voices to sort of reach out to, obviously for the sort of slightly more sort of, I would say, unethical, but sort of, some of our projects, probably best some people don't know about, but like any sort of general sort of resources or contacts rather.
I don't know. I mean, I think let me pass the contact details on to Farmers Observatory. They would have more contacts that way.
Okay, if you want to post contact details or whatever just after this call, or it's not rush.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll do that because I think you should talk to them and get a steer from them on what's going on. Just give me your full name.
Ryan McConnell.
And can I pass them this number?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So the Forest Observatory is all people I know well and I've worked with for years, so okay. they're trusted people, right? I'm not passing it to anybody not trusted.
Cool.
But I'll pass your number.
Graham Reardon in the chat says the penny has dropped. That penny dropped hard in the last 20 seconds. I felt that penny hit the ground. She's twigged, and she realizes once it's been twigged, your mind starts to go backwards, and you start to kind of. I've noticed it with a few other of these things. There's or whatever you call these. There's a kind of a moment where they start to have this little bit of a moment, and the problem then is that you're thinking, your brain, one part of your brain is thinking to get to the point of like, and this is speculation. Well, Walshy here says replay that for us. I could be wrong. It's just my general feeling on it is that one part of your brain is starting to worry and go, I mean, think about it. Who is this guy? The other part is tracking back over what you've already said. And the other part is still trying to have the conversation with whatever the person is talking to you about. And then the other side of your mind is trying to think of the consequences if you did say something bad and where you're at. So you kind of enter this kind of slightly dazed form of speaking. I feel like that anyway about her. It sounds, I heard some penny dropping there.
Just give me your full name.
Contact details or whatever.
It's kind of when she asked for his name.
Probably best some people don't know about, but like any sort of general sort of resources or contacts rather.
I don't know. I mean, I think let me pass the contact details on to Farmers Observatory. They would have more contacts that way.
Okay, if you want to post contact details or whatever just after this call, or it's not rush.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll do that because I think you should talk to them and get a steer from them on what's going on. Just give me your full name.
Ryan McConnell.
And can I pass them this number?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So the Forest Observatory is all people I know well and I've worked with for years, so okay. they're trusted people, right? I'm not passing it to anybody not trusted.
Cool.
But I'll pass your number to them if you don't mind, rather than the other way around.
Do you have my number? Or?
Yeah, the one you're calling me from is okay, but
yeah.
Oh, it's come up with the private number.
Yeah, it's actually a work phone.
Okay.
Just so you know yourself, I'll maybe get back to you. I can give you an email. That's just as good. Just procuring a sort of just a particular phone for these kind of things. But yeah, that's perfect. Lovely to.
What email address do you want to pass on then?
IrishStudentsAgainstFascism@gmail.com. I'll send it. Just have the text form if.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah,
sure.
pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll be in touch regarding future projects.
Yeah. And well, look, keep in touch with me. As I say, the escort stuff is is broad based, but if I can put you in touch with anybody, if I can help in any way, let me
Yeah,
know.
if say after this call you want to like compile a sort of list of like contact details or just people that could be of use.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to FRO, and I'm sure they'll give you some stuff.
Cool.
Some
That's
contact details for
perfect.
people.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All
Thanks very
right.
much,
Good
Doctor.
luck, Brian.
Cheers.
Take care.
Have a good day. Solidarity. Bye.
Okay, so conclusion. Comments, thoughts, observations, all that kind of stuff. So where am I at here? Let's go back to full screen and I'll leave you alone. Go to bed. The only conclusion I have from this, because it's the same kind of thing, right? There's no point trying to come up with a novel conclusion every time with this stuff. Nor am I going to try and rehash the various themes we've gone over and subjects we've gone over tonight and try to link them all together. Whatever, right? I'll just say goodbye. But one thought I have is like, she calls herself this anti-racist activist or whatever, right? And of course, I don't identify as racist, right? I don't. I genuinely am not naturally inclined towards kind of bigotry or fear, and that's a pathologization they like to use as fear. But I'm actually rather comfortable enough in it as a general spectrum of things. I'm not overly affected or kind of. You get what I mean? And I think most people are this way. But like, I'm reluctant to say the phrase I'm not a racist because it's such a cringe thing to even have to say. But you know what I mean? I'm not that. I'm not like that, right? I just have my points of view on these things. And it's like the father Ted. I'm not a racist, but it's you know what I'm saying about that. I'm not this caricature they make out. Therefore, I don't. I refuse to identify with the word they use attached to their caricature of things, right? So in that sense, but in the sense she means it, and her version of it, you heard about the radicalization on the playground with Trump, right? Clearly her bar is very low for what a racist is. So if, according to her, she were to call me a racist, which she would, and you take that as the definition. So you say, I'm the person she's talking about, or I'm a version or an example of a person she's talking about when she talks about this stuff. It kept crossing my mind throughout this, heard this piece with her, is like, just debate me. And that sounds like a Ben Shapiro thing, like, I will destroy her with facts and logic and in a debate. I don't mean like this kind of spurgy, the kind of facts, whatever thing. Or like a moderated kind of technical debate, although I would do that too. I just mean an open discussion where we can compare our ideas against each other in a kind of a, not overly combative, but a kind of a competitive, in a competitive way, right? A debate of some sort. Debate, discussion. I mean, again, you're paid by the government basically, or like the UN and all of this stuff. And you have this point of view, and you're interloping at all levels of our society without a mandate. And you might be mocking me here in the chat for like overly caveating myself, but my face and my name is up here, and I don't like giving people sound bites. So sometimes I go on a little, I kind of extend my point of view just to make it clear, just for kind of bit of propriety, and just for the those who want to soundbite and mischaracterize you or whatever, right? You don't end up going, for example, if I'm saying Lucy Michael would call me a racist, I don't want to use the phrase, in order to explain my point of view on that, I don't want to use the phrase I am a, and just kind of end up unconsciously. It's like when people kind of almost, because they're influenced so much by the media, they end up referring to themselves as far right, ironically, and stuff like that. You just want to stay away from that kind of stuff, because it's not the case, and I don't identify with that. Anyway, it's like you're in this role, you're interloping at all levels of society, and at the core of it, you will not stop talking about far right and racists, right, Lucy? And then you're identifying me as one of the people who fits that bill. If you're going to be, and I don't mean me, I don't think she's talking about me. When I say me, I'm just using myself as a little avatar for the broader thing, because I'm talking right here, right? If call me an avatar for the moment for this, let's just say stuff she's talking about. why would you be talking about me constantly all the time, me as a representation? Why would you always be talking about us like this and not just for all the years of it, just talk to me in public? Just say, let's talk, let's compare our ideas in a fair setting. It can be moderated by an objective kind of juror or judge who will step in if you're shouting, if you're being unfair, if you're telling blatant factual lies, if you are filibustering, like general just moderation of a discussion to keep it legitimate, but yet free enough to give your point of view. Have that discussion with me. I will have that discussion with any of these people and have it live and recorded and uninterrupted by a heckler's veto. None of that, right? Just in private or in this medium, and just have it go out live and have it be fair. I would even go as far as to say, I will give you 2/3 of the time. I'll take 1/3 of the time. I'd handicap myself in this, and say I will let the people of their own accord make their judgment of who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. Not that it's that simple, but make it the judgment, the moral judgment. So first off, let them make the factual judgment of who is more factually compelling in this situation, based on facts, statistics, and all of this stuff, right? Just reality as it is objectively. Who is in the factual, who is in the right factually, and then above and beyond that, which is essential morally speaking, because of course she's not just saying I'm wrong about stuff. She of course would imply that I'm wrong about stuff, but more importantly, it's trying to say that you are a demonic force, representation of some form of kind of malevolence or evil. And that's when you break down the isms and the words and the racism and all this kind of stuff and hate and blah, 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 they're effectively calling you a moral evil of some sort. E.D. Daly says, who are you talking about? I'm talking about Dr. Lucy Michael, right? So like, if I always get distracted by chatting in the middle of my rants. Now I can't upload them online and be like, here was my rant on this thing. But okay, so the factual thing and then the moral thing. And like I say, an hour or whatever it is, have this kind of debate type thing, discussion, and let the audience of their own volition decide who is factually correct in this argument, in this debate. I don't know how you define the debate, just about racism, anti-racism, immigration, diversity, this stuff, right? Who is factually more compelling? I won't say who is right, who is more right, who is seen as more compelling. And crucially, I would be very confident, who can come out based on the audience point of view, being in the moral, righteous position, and who is the malevolent one, and who is the corrupted one, and who is ultimately, in a sense, who is the hateful one. I would be rather confident, and I would do that completely respectfully, and civilly, so long as it's live, so long as it's open, so long as it's uncorrupted by some kind of outside force. A fair discussion debate. Now, the answer to that question is, of course, they wouldn't do it. They have not done it, and they will never do it. Despite talking about us all the time, despite writing about us all the time, despite trying to come up with policy against us all the time, they will not talk to us in any kind of public setting. They might try to interview you and clip 2 sentences and paste them together to make you look bad. Yeah, they might do that kind of stuff. They might do this, they might do that. But in terms of just an open discussion, uncorrupted, a fair discussion, why won't they do it? We know they won't do it. We know they never will do it. The important question is, why won't they do it, right? And I'm not going to try to answer that. I think it speaks for itself. Doc Lucy M, do we have Lucy in the chat, or is this like a avatar? Doc Lucy M says, you never asked me for an interview. I can't tell if that's her or not. Well, if it is you, Dr. Lucy Michael, then I'm asking you now. And if it's not, then whatever. Yeah, these people never will. And if they do, if I'm proven wrong on that, then brilliant, because I look forward to it. But they won't. And the important point is, and I'm not going to answer this one, I'm more, or give my point of view on it, I'm more imploring you to have a few minutes and try to, even though you feel like you might already know, try to explore it in your mind in a bit of depth. Why won't they ever do that in the format I've suggested, in public, fair discussion, debate? Let's do it. If you're going to talk about us all the time and make your entire living off of us, then why not have just a discussion in public so that the people can see? Why won't you do that? That's what I think about a lot when I see and hear from these people. So anyway, I hope you're all well, and it's 12 now, and I'm very privileged and I don't know, flattered that there's 100 odd of you here with me at 12. I appreciate it. So yeah, that was that, and I'll just leave it there. Basically, I will see you tomorrow night. Thanks for watching. See you.